5 Live. Now I'm joined by Edmund Fitton-Brown, a former British ambassador to Yemen and now works at the Extremism Project. He supports the UK, clearly backing Israel in this conflict, and Chris Doyle is the director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding, who's got concerns over the UK being too closely tied to Israel. Edmund, let's talk to you first of all. What do you think the UK's stance has been so far, and what do you think of it?
I think the UK has been tacitly supportive of Israel. If you look at the way that the Foreign Secretary consulted in the United States with Marco Rubio and Witkoff, the UK, I think, is playing a useful role because it has gone to Geneva and presented Iran with options along with our European David Lammy's European counterparts. So I think it makes sense for the UK to continue to work closely with the United States on that. The reason is that the UK can't make the weather on its own on this conflict. Clearly, the conflict has erupted between Israel and Iran, and at the moment it is a purely bilateral conflict between the two. The only country that can make a major change to that situation is the United States, and that's why we should be very closely consulting with the Americans.
Then does that not suggest that we should step back a bit? To use your words, the only country that's going to have any impact there is the US. Why should the UK be so front and centre in that discussion?
I don't think we lack any impact. I think we already have some impact by presenting to the Iranians the reality that already the kind of options that would restart talks are beyond what they would previously have ever agreed to as their own red lines. If you looked at the way that the European position was set out to the Iranians, it was already recognizing that Iran needed to make additional concessions. And I think nobody wants to see the war continue unnecessarily. And therefore, if there was a route back to diplomacy, then that would be a good thing to take. And I think the UK is contributing to that, and also usefully showing that Europe is united in this, that there isn't any daylight between the three largest European powers.
Chris, do you have any fear with the UK being too closely tied to Israel in this situation?
Well, I think that the UK, its only real option is to make sure that it is actually a broker in all of this to try to end this war, which is utterly reckless. It was started by Israel a week ago, at least in the near term, because there is absolutely no prizes for this continuing. It's as if we have not learnt yet from the follies of previous British adventures in the Middle East, not least Iraq in 2003. We have to demonstrate that absolutely we are hell-bent in bringing an end to this war. I don't know why that so many Western figures talk about de-escalation or restraint. We should be calling for a ceasefire. De-escalation, I don't think, means anything. And we should be doing the groundwork to bridge the gaps between the sides in order to get to some sort of deal. Because at the moment, what we are looking at, even Israeli security figures are now being quoted in the Israeli media to say this could go on a lot longer than they had anticipated. And the longer it does, the greater the risks that it could metastasize across the region, bring in other actors, could disrupt the global economy, have an environmental impact. It would be absolutely irresponsible for us not to exert every single part of the British diplomatic system to try to get to some form of deal. And let's also be clear, because I think the framing here needs to be important. It's not getting Iran back to diplomacy. Iran was about to enter its 6th round of talks with the United States in Oman. It should have happened last Sunday. It was Israel that bombed Iran at that point, effectively bombing away the negotiating table. And I think at times we have been far too reluctant to call out the Israeli government under Netanyahu for its irresponsible actions across the region, where the United States, in fact, under Trump, has been trying to calm things. At each and every point, Netanyahu has escalated, whether it's in Gaza, the West Bank, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and also Iran. It's not to say that Israel didn't have grievances, but he has escalated in order to bring about this sort of situation and to drag in other parties, the United States in particular.
Edmund, the diplomacy and the talks that Chris mentioned there now, sixth round of those talks, some of the people who were involved with those talks are no longer with us now because of some of the strikes over the days that have gone by. Should the UK be tying itself more closely to an institution that has been involved with and ultimately the ceasing of this diplomacy?
Which institution are you referring to? Sorry.
I'm talking about if we look at the 6 rounds of talks, we look at the individuals who are involved with those 6 rounds of talks. Some of them, it is believed, were lost their lives in some of the strikes in days and weeks gone by. Therefore, those talks will cease. We expect and we hope that other talks open up in a kind of murky, nuanced way. Should we be looking to step away from that rather than leaning into it?
I don't think we should be stepping away. I think, I actually agree that we should be doing more in terms of a diplomatic contribution. And I do want to see things get back to talks. But I do think it's important to, some of the comments made about Israel are important to take issue with a little bit. And I think one of the reasons that the UK is cautious about this is understandably it has reservations about the Israeli policy in Gaza. I think the situation with Iran is different, and I think the situation with Yemen is also different. These are clear cases where the Israelis have been subjected to unrelenting aggression from the Iranians and their proxies, including the Yemeni Houthis. And they have, over the course of the last year and a half, nearly 2 years, been responding, but not particularly escalating. Now, we've come to a point of escalation with Iran, where the Israelis have clearly concluded that they can no longer take the risk of the Iranians becoming nuclear armed. And you can understand their concerns because of their extreme vulnerability to attack, and because the Iranians and the Yemeni Houthis, and indeed Hamas, have said again and again that they seek the annihilation of the state of Israel.
Chris, we'll leave the final word to you on this. What could go wrong if this continues according to you?
I mean, wow, that leaves you a whole menu of options. I mean, this war could really spread. Obviously, if the United States gets involved, Iran has options. Most of them maybe not very conventional.
I suppose, from a British point of view, Chris, from a British point of view.
Well, that could, if the United States gets sucked in, and then Britain could also, as a key ally of the United States, get sucked in. We understand that Downing Street is reluctant to get involved in those military strikes. But we could still, for example, by giving authority to the United States to use Diego Garcia, be seen as complicit in it. But I would also just like to say, to respond somewhat to what was said about, the Israeli aggression, we have to remember that Israel is led by somebody who's actually got an arrest warrant out at the International Criminal Court that many see is committing a genocide in Gaza. So we have to be very careful in being seen to partner somebody who's had a reckless disregard for international law. So, for example, if we did start helping Israel militarily, we wouldn't know what Netanyahu would do in terms of targeting Iran. We don't know what the exit strategy is at all. And I think we need to keep a distance. This is somebody who has utter disregard for regional security, whose record is appalling, who actually over decades that he's been prime minister has failed to engender the trust of world leaders at all. People don't trust him. I don't trust the Iranian regime either. That's absolutely true. And there are reasons to be very wary of it. Of course, it's got an appalling record, but both of them do.
Well, Chris and Edmund, we're going to talk about Gaza now very shortly. That is Chris Doyle, the director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding, and Edmund Fitton-Brown, a former British ambassador to Yemen and now works at the Extremism Project. To both of you, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your insight this evening. If you want to share yours with us, 08085 909 693.